So Edmund, let me know when you see 9 names up there, board members. I see 7.
Okay, we're ready to roll whenever you guys are.
Thank you.
Edmund, is Bob going to be here?
He's just not signed in yet. Do you want to give him a minute or do you want to get started?
Give one minute. Bob?
All right, very good. Hold on one moment. We're waiting for the cue to go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are recording and broadcasting. The floor is yours.
All right, welcome everyone to the meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I'd like to call the meeting to order. In accordance with the federal, state, and local guidelines to protect public health and safety in response to the coronavirus, this meeting will be conducted entirely via remote access. We will take written comments and questions and email those to the site here, delta@deltacouncil.ca.gov, and verbal comments as well. And in your request, please indicate the agenda item in which you would like your public comment read if it's written. If you prefer oral, use the raise hand function at the time at which the agenda item calls for public input. And once you are acknowledged, and then provide your name and affiliation and oral comments. We do have a very tight agenda, so I'm going to try and hold oral comments, if I can, to 3 minutes, and you're certainly welcome to submit any written material after that. Let me go ahead and take the roll, and please give us your full name and whether or not you have any additional declarations. I'll start out with Jim.
Jim Cloran. No, I have no declarations.
Virginia.
Virginia Dale, no new declarations.
Joe.
No new declarations. Joe Fernando.
Tanya.
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Tom.
Tom Holzer, no new declarations.
Diane.
Diane McKnight, no new declarations.
And Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, no new declarations.
Okay, Bob, is Bob Nyman here?
Yes, I'm on the phone. Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
Thanks, Bob. And Jay Lund is not here, I believe, but will join us in about a half an hour. And I am the chair, Steve Brandt, with no new declarations. So the agenda today is, like I said, is a tight one. We'll have a reasonably lengthy report by the chair and the Stewardship Council, and then have a presentation by the Delta Science Program on an assessment they've conducted. And we'll follow that up with a brief discussion about future reviews, get a report on the lead scientist, and then talk about in preparation for upcoming Delta board meetings. So with that, I'd like to move on to item number 2, which is the chair's report. I'd like to start out with Cheryl Patel. Cheryl has been our student fellow, Sea Grant student fellow for the past, over the past year. And I just want to thank her for all her work. She's done a tremendous job. I know it's been challenging to do this from afar. And I know that creates a lot of challenges for everything, but you've done a fantastic job, and particularly of helping us out and leading the way for the science needs assessment, but you've been working on a lot of other things. Before we jump to you, I see Jay Lund has joined us. Jay?
Nothing new to report.
Thanks, Jay. So Cheryl, would you like to just summarize maybe what you've learned and where you're going?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate that. I just have a very short slides to
share, and so I'm going to share my screen so you'll have something to watch while I talk to you. So give me a second while I get that put up. Thank you. Okay. And you should be able to see that. Let me just move all of your faces from, so you don't have to see that. Okay. So thanks again for giving me a little bit of time during this meeting, everybody, to share some of my reflections from this past year. When I began the fellowship on April 1st of last year, there was definitely a lot of uncertainty around us. And because of the pandemic, like Steve said, I began working with the Science-Based Adaptive Management Unit remotely and got to meet everybody at the agency and everyone on the Independent Science Board virtually. While it was a whole new mode of living and working, I really got and after a whole year of it, I really got some hindsight and a chance to reflect on my experiences. And so as I began working on different projects that I found interesting, it became clear that while there was a lot of uncertainty in the world, I was still very certain about the goals I wanted to achieve and what I hoped to gain from the fellowship. And it was definitely a unique position I fell into because I had the opportunity to work alongside the Delta ISB and learn about how the board operated and get to support the members throughout their various tasks. So I definitely learned how to be an effective meeting facilitator. I got to see how collaboration can really help build a better product in the end. I got to do some independent work, which was really great. And then I got some experience in science synthesis. And then finally, I got to see how science translated into management. And that was a really big reason I wanted to take this position in the first place. And then while working virtually during quarantine and having to socially distance came with its challenges, of course, I definitely had the opportunity to develop skills that I did not anticipate gaining when I first applied for this fellowship. And so I definitely became more adept in cloud collaboration, which is important as it's going to be more used as we move forward, I'm sure. I got to learn how to network virtually, which is also important as we, our community and our world begins to be more globalized. I really learned and became proficient in digital visual tools, which was a really fun process and experience. And while we all collectively experienced this really difficult time together, I got to emulate the compassion and patience that I saw others definitely practicing in this professional space. And so that was definitely an important one. And then one perk I didn't expect but thoroughly enjoyed was getting to have my dog in the office every day. So that was nice. And then so after a year, I pretty much feel like a semi-expert in virtual event planning. I had the chance to support the development and implementation of 3 different types of virtual events, including the Science Needs Assessment Workshop, the Zooplankton Ecology Symposium, and the Adaptive Management Forum. So each of them was really valuable opportunity for me to learn from seasoned coworkers as they organized and facilitated the planning process. And I had a really great time experiencing how to contribute to the successes of these different events through different tasks. So that was a really valuable learning experience. And then as Steve mentioned, there were a few projects that I got to help specifically on for the Delta Independent Science Board. And I'm going to just highlight 2 of the main projects I got to contribute to here. So the first is the Monitoring Enterprise Review. I was tasked to explore the inventory tool that ESSA created and see how it could be used to answer questions about the Delta monitoring, and also create a tutorial that helped provide an overview of the tool so that others can explore the data. And I was really excited to get to share that with you all earlier this year. And then part of the Monitoring Enterprise Review included a questionnaire, as some of you may know, questionnaire for the stakeholders. And so I got to do some analysis for that questionnaire responses. And it was a good chance to learn more about monitoring through the lens of these stakeholders, but also gain experience in qualitative data analysis. And then the second project is the Science Needs Assessment. I feel really lucky that I got to be included into this project early on when the process was still going to have an in-person workshop, which eventually had to be postponed to be moved into the fall because of the pandemic, of course. And so that gave me a chance to contribute to the planning and implementation of 4 brown bag seminars that happened throughout the summer lab last year, and gave me that gave me a lot of experience in learning how to put that together. And then the planning team also gained more feedback from the Delta community for the assessment itself. And then finally, I learned more about project management overall in the process of putting on the workshop in October. And the work I got to do for that, I got to work with some fantastic people. And I'm really in deep gratitude for their support as we went through that process together, because it was really exciting and new for everybody and a good learning experience. And lastly, we have all been stuck at home a lot more this past year, and I'm no exception. So I've tried to make the best of it. I've taken the opportunity to really clean and declutter around me, so I have a clean space to have as a living space and an office space. I learned to sew with my mom last year, and so we learned to make masks together, which was really nice. And I've been dabbling in watercoloring, which I've really enjoyed so far. And finally, I'm making some time to watch some of the movies I've been wanting to see for a long time. And then with that, I really just want to thank you again for giving me the space to share these reflections. And thank you to everyone who's been very welcoming and supportive during my fellowship. It's really been a pleasure getting to know all of the members and getting a chance to work with y'all. So thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Where are you off to next?
You know, I started this fellowship having to pause a lot of my master's thesis research. And so I am excited to go back into that full time as I continue looking for a job and finally get that master's degree under my belt.
Great. Yeah. Well, you've done a terrific job, and you know, the Sea Grant Fellows, like I said, are just absolutely critical for us, and you have been just stellar in the amount of support you've given us. So I really appreciate that and want to thank you on behalf of the board. And I don't know if any other board members have comments or questions.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for all your help organizing those sometimes chaotic, I know that behind the scenes it was chaotic at times to organize all those workshops and symposia for the science needs assessments, but particularly under these very trying conditions. Really appreciated all your effort on that.
Thanks. It's been such a great learning experience, and I really value it. So thank you all so much.
Thank you for helping with our chaos.
And best of luck for the future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thanks again, Cheryl. I'll move on to report a few other things. The Delta Independent Science Board was going to present to the or is going to make a presentation to the council on the invasive species report. We were originally scheduled for May 27th. That council meeting has been changed and moved up to I think the 20th and 21st. Our presentation, we're still not exactly certain what day that will be, either the 21st or 27th. At that time, my intent was to present, formally hand over our review of what we're calling the science of non-native species in a dynamic delta, and give that presentation, and then also to talk a little bit about our plans, upcoming plans for where we stand in terms of future reviews and so forth. As part of our products and part of our reviews, some of you, I believe, attended the Bay Delta Science Conference. We gave 2 presentations there. I gave one on again, the science of non-native species in a dynamic delta. I think you were all sent the URL for that. I'm thinking we might just put that up as one of our products as a scientific presentation that has been recorded. And then Mark from ESSA gave a presentation on largely ESSA's part of these review of the monitoring enterprise, although some of the board members were co-authors on that presentation as well. You've also been sent the URL for that. Now, long-standing tradition for the Delta ISB has been to submit a letter to the organizers of this conference, giving impressions of the Delta ISB and making recommendations on things they should continue, things they might do better, things like that. And we've done that. But often during those meetings, we've had a number of folks physically attending. Those were all face-to-face meetings, and we had a number of board members attending, and we put that together. So I'm thinking, given this is a sort of a one-shot only, hopefully, virtual meeting, that there's probably not a need for us as a board to specifically comment on that conference, unless folks, does anyone feel that we should? I know Jim attended some, and I'm not sure who else attended, Tanya and others, but normally we would attend the whole meeting. Okay, since no one has, we'll just go ahead and not submit a letter, not because we're not interested in the conference, but because we feel that our comments on this particular format and so forth wouldn't be relevant at the next face-to-face meeting. The status.
Sorry, I was trying to find a way to raise my hand, but I couldn't find it. I would just say that there is a lot of conversation about continuing in a hybrid format in the future. So I do think feedback would be beneficial because the science program is considering which aspects of a meeting like this would be carried forward into a post-pandemic world.
So how many of the board members feel they attended enough of the meeting to be able to provide some advice? So, I think maybe on an individual basis, you might talk to some folks. I attended, I think, most of the meeting. And I know that Jim actually gave a presentation, so I know he was there. And but I think that maybe just asking us individually rather than having a formal board letter. Jim?
I just thought it went really surprisingly well for the number of sessions that were going on concurrently. I don't remember seeing any glitches in the system. I thought it was surprisingly smooth. I thought this was going to be an experiment and parts of it weren't going to work well, and I didn't see any evidence of that.
I agree with that. I think it was also done very well, and the mixture of the morning sessions and the plenary, then the individual talks, and then the follow-up special sessions, I think was a really good mixture. So you weren't always there. I did ask the question once of how long the videos would remain, and would encourage folks to keep those videos up for a long time, if not indefinitely, at least for a while, for people, because there's a lot of things that you can only see one talk at a time. And at least in this case, you can go back and look at the talks you weren't able to see because of conflicts.
I want to second that. I mean, that was one advantage of a virtual meeting, is that if there were two talks that you wanted to hear that were in different sessions, you could listen to both of them because the talks were archived at the end of the day.
Yeah.
For that discussion, and I did just find the raised hand function, so I'll know next time.
Okay, let me move on the status reports of our ongoing reviews. The one on invasive species is very likely going to be completed and turned over to Edmund and Company for production by next week. We've gotten everyone's comments, individual comments and so forth. Remember, we already approved the content of that. We were just looking at editorial clarifications. And I've gone through most of that, and it should be done by next week. And it goes back to Edmund for for final production on that and release. And hopefully that'll be in time for the council to see it. I know the monitoring review has met, and the folks dealing with the monitoring, the writing team, have set up a series of individual interviews for next week. And so that's moving forward. Joe, did you want to say anything more to that?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. And I believe the water supply reliability review, which is also being worked on hard by the writing team, has now a new draft that they are beginning to look at. Jay, any update? You're on mute, Jay.
It is out to several of the members that expressed the most interest in getting their hands dirty with it or reviewing it. And then I'm thinking there's another one or two folks that seem to have a tolerance to review it once. So I'm thinking that when we get some more comments back from this next round, then for the remaining members interested in reviewing it, then they'll have an opportunity for the next version after this one. But of course, they're welcome to comment on it at this time as well if they want. Anyone is on the board.
Okay, Jim, do you have something?
Jay, I volunteered to do that. So the next version, send to me and I'll try to have kind of high level comments too within a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, another report of progress is that if you recall, Dick Norgard a while back started this whole effort about looking at rapid environmental change and the need for science for that. And as part of that effort, there was writing and submission of a manuscript, and that manuscript has now been accepted. It's in press in the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science. It should appear fairly soon. The title of it is Preparing Scientists, Policymakers, and Managers for a Fast Forward Future. The co-authorship includes 9 members of the board, and it's being both present and past board members, and it was being head up by Dick Norgard. So that is officially in press. So that's another accomplishment. One more thing is that, as most of you know, we have put forward a request for 2 postdocs to help support the board efforts. And those are nearly complete. The statement of work is more or less completed, and they should go out shortly to seal that contract up. And at that stage, there will be a search for 2 postdoctoral scholars. And I can send you, I believe I can send you what the current state of work is, which describes that. And then that will go out and it'll be a Sea Grant postdoctoral scholar, 2 of them. And it's spelled out particularly how they can help our efforts. And so that will give us some more staff support at a postdoctoral level. So I think that's all I have. First of all, any questions from the board on anything, things I might have missed? Okay, let's see where we are time-wise. Edmund, where do we have I believe there's a public comment on this item?
Yes, we have a public comment from Deirdre. I'm going to unmute you, Deirdre. Please state your name and affiliation, and you can provide your comments.
My name is Deirdre Desjardins, and I'm with California Water Research. This comment is on, I wanted to thank the board and the chair for pressing forward in spite of the board's current lack of adequate funding. And I just wanted to, it's in the letter, but I worked with California Water Research as a pro bono attorney who was the staff attorney for the Department of Rehab and Foreign Appeals Board at the Department of Rehab for many years. And we looked at, one of the questions that came up is the Delta Independent Science Board, is it a science review panel or is it a standing board? And as we looked into the government code, you're actually all officers of the state and you have the right and duty to carry out the statutory mandate for your office. And there's never been any fiduciary issues on the board previously, so the board has always been free to concentrate completely on scientific issues. But I did want to point out the other thing that my attorney went over was that As appointed office holders, you have a right to see all documents pertaining to your office. And the funding for the Delta Independent Science Board and the manner in which you are compensated pertains to your office. There is some legislation to address the board's funding issues, which our California Water Research and other organizations commented on. That legislation will be coming forward. I've asked the chair, there should be a briefing. There's briefings for other boards on this. And also you should be able to get fiscal updates. So again, thank you very much, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, Deidre, for those comments and continued support. I do plan to bring up the last item you mentioned when we get to item number, the next item number 3. So, thank you. Any questions for Deidre? Okay, I think we can move on to item number 3, which is a report by Susan Tatalian on the Delta Stewardship Council.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be able to be with you this afternoon. I'll start by saying I am pleased to announce we have a new Chief Deputy Executive Officer at the Council, Ryan Stanbra. As you probably know, Ryan was our legislative and policy advisor, and I'm very glad that Ryan has accepted this position and the responsibilities. He brings valuable experience and talent to this new role, and I anticipate he'll be an excellent chief deputy. I'm also happy to report that we have a new council member. As of yesterday, the governor's office announced that Virginia Madueno of Riverbank has been appointed to the council. And she brings much policymaking and business management, communications, and community organizing experience to the council. For more information about her appointment, you can go to gov.ca.gov, and that website has a newsroom tab, and she's one of the announcements reported in the April 15 item at the governor's webpage. So now on to a few highlights of council activities in March. At the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting, our key member of our Delta Adapts team, who has now moved on to Department of Water Resources, Andrew Schwartz, he moderated an excellent panel of speakers whose presentations focused on nature-based climate adaptation. Dr. Letitia Grenier walked us through the development and some initial results of the landscape scenario planning tool. And Dr. Amrith Gunasekera shared highlights of California Department of Food and Agriculture's listening sessions, which were aimed at getting farmer and rancher-led solutions for climate resilience. And Julie Rentner, the president of River Partners, shared some benefits that are already being realized from on-the-ground nature-based multi-benefit flood risk reduction projects in the Central Valley. And after the panel presentations, DPIC members shared their observations and enthusiasm about various aspects of the information presented. There was a lot of enthusiasm about the Delta Landscape Scenario Planning tool. And so this agenda item ran long, and unfortunately, we were also experiencing some technical difficulties that day. Microsoft Teams had a major outage. So there were some shaky moments, and that resulted in the long discussion and some of the technical difficulties shifted the schedule a bit, and we had to reschedule the Delta Science lightning updates to the next DPIC meeting. Also at DPIC, as you probably know, Dr. Brandt and Dr. Lund presented an update about the scientific needs assessment to the DPIC members and asked committee members to contribute staff from their agencies to an interagency task force that will help refine the recommendations to be published in the final scientific needs assessment. And so now Amanda Bowl, the Council's Special Assistant for Planning and Science, is working with Drs. Brandt and Lund and Edmund Yu and Karen Kafitz and others to convene the interagency task force. And the final recommendations are to be presented at the July DPIC meeting. At our March 25 council meeting, excuse me, I need to get a drink of water here. At our March council meeting, Ruth Darling, the program manager with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and Mary Jimenez, chief of Department of Water Resources System-Wide Multi-Benefit Initiatives Branch, gave the council an update on the process and activities for producing the 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And the Delta Protection Commission's Executive Director, Eric Vink, briefed the council on economic data gathered as part of the effort to update the Recreation and Tourism chapter of the Delta Economic Sustainability Plan. You probably know that the Delta is now California's one and only National Heritage Area, and this economic data will inform development of the National Heritage Area Plan as well. And at our upcoming meeting, we're anticipating a presentation from our Delta Adapts team. They'll be sharing some preliminary thinking on how to approach development of the adaptation strategy as part of the climate resilience effort for the Delta region. And that's it for me, Steve, and I'll take any questions you might have.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. First, I'll just add one more item on the science needs assessment presentation to DPIC. Our goal there was to present our initial findings primarily related to using ecosystem forecasting as an integrating tool across agencies. And our intent was to ask the agencies to provide senior staff to help us with refining those recommendations to make sure we don't overlap things that are already being done or to include them and so forth. Now, we didn't get any questions whatsoever, so either we gave a perfect presentation or none of the internet was working. But but secondly, we do have a number of agency people involved in this, and we have already set up 4 meetings over the next through the rest of this month and into the first week of June to work on those detailed presentations, so that are detailed recommendations, to have them in a format to present back to DPIC at their June meeting. So any questions for Susan? Okay, thanks very much, Susan. I did have one question that I think you knew was coming. I wonder if at our May meeting, you could just provide us a status report on any pending legislation that may be on the horizon for that might impact DPIC, or I'm sorry, might impact a Delta Independent Science Board?
Well, I hesitate to commit, Steve, but if we are able to do so, I think it would be best that Ryan Stanbrough be the presenter. He's our go-to guy on legislation. That's his expertise and policy. And but let me look into whether or not we can do that at your May meeting.
Yeah, that's fine. Brian would be fine. We're just as board members, if there's pending legislation, we don't necessarily follow the legislation that closely. And so it'd be useful to have just the Brian's perspective on where it's at and where it might go or what it might mean, or just a status report would be valuable.
Okay.
Thanks. Any other questions on the council? Okay, Edmund, I believe we also have a public comment here.
Yes, from Deirdre. Deirdre, I'm going to unmute you. Once again, please state your name and affiliation.
Yes, Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. With respect to a briefing on pending legislation, the Baldwin Hills Conservancy Board, which is a similar small board, was given an update by their executive officer on when there were amendments to the Baldwin Hills Conservancy Act. The legislature is amending the section of the Delta Reform Act that created the Delta Independent Science Board, and it does concern this board. And I hope that the Delta Stewardship Council will allow the board members to exercise their full duties as board members. Also, with respect to the science action agenda, one of the statutory duties of the Independent Science Board is to have oversight of scientific research, monitoring, and assessment programs that support adaptive management in the Delta. And just as an outside group that advocates for independent science, we're concerned about the involvement by a large number of water agencies that receive grants through the Delta Science Program in the science needs assessment. They wouldn't not, it is a bit of a conflict of interest for them to be potentially directing the research. And it's one of the reasons we're concerned that there be enough funding for the Independent Science Board to truly engage in the science need assessment. Because that's one of the most important directions, particularly in this time of rapid climate change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deidre. In the past, as you probably know, the Delta, and for the newer members, one of the things we have done is review the science action agenda. I believe it was a formal review of the science action agenda. And it is my expectation we will be asked and offered the opportunity to do that again. And when Laurel gives her presentation, I'm going to ask her when that's going to come. So thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I think we can move on to item number 4. Item number 4 is an information item on the Delta Science Board assessment done by the Delta Science Program. And the background for that and rationale can be given by Lauren Hastings, who will lead this effort and accompanied by Jessia Patavia and Edmund Yu. So the floor is yours, Lauren.
Great, thanks, Steve. I think we can go right ahead and get our presentation up. I think Chelsea's going to share her screen. Great, we'll go ahead and get started then. So I'm pleased to be reporting today on our Delta Independent Science Board assessment. I want to acknowledge my co-authors and co-presenters, Chelsea Batavia and Edmund Yu, with whom I've been working on this effort. We'll be splitting up the presentation duties based on the sections for which we're responsible. And I want to point out that we're still completing our analyses for this assessment and we're still writing the report. So these are initial findings intended to inform your planning discussions. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the background, purpose, and approach for our project. Next slide. The idea for this review came from Deputy Executive Officer for Science, Louise Conrad, back in 2019, well before the current pandemic and compensation issues. Louise had in mind that it would be good to do a look back over the first 10 years of the board's existence to help inform the new board, which we were anticipating for September of 2020. So the Delta Reform Act of 2009 launched the Delta Independent Science Board with the charge to provide oversight of the scientific research, monitoring, and assessment programs that support adaptive management of the Delta. The original 10 members met for the first time in September of 2010, and by the Delta Reform Act had 5-year terms with the authority to serve up to 2 terms. 5 of the original 10 members served 2 full terms, and 1 newer member chose to serve only 1 term, so leaving 6 vacancies in 2020, mid-2020. Previous lead scientist John Calloway did a nationwide search and nominated 6 new members who were confirmed by the Delta Stewardship Council and started their terms in September of 2020, and they're here with us today. Next slide, please. So the purpose of our assessment is to document in Delta Independent Science Board activities and the approaches that have been taken over the first 10 years, to assess the perceived value and impact of the Delta Independent Science Board and its products, and to report the findings to the Independent Science Board, Council, stakeholders, and public for future planning. Our approach was to inventory Delta Independent Science Board products and uses. Edmund is the lead on that section. To interview Delta Independent Science Board members, Chelsea and I performed those interviews. So we interviewed several of the previous board members and the 4 continuing members that are still on the board today. Chelsea and I performed those interviews, and Chelsea is, or I am the lead for that analysis. And then we interviewed and surveyed stakeholders about perceptions and use of Delta Independent Science Board products. Chelsea and I performed those interviews, and Chelsea's the lead for the analysis. All 3 of us participated in developing this approach and the questions. So now I'm going to hand it over to Edmund for his section.
Thanks, Lauren. Today, I'll be providing an overview of the activities that the ISB has done to date and how they have been applied in the science enterprise. Next slide. Since its inception, the ISB has completed 72 products, including thematic reviews, review of specific documents, and comment letters calling for action. Next slide. When a ISB review is complete, the ISB will report its findings to the council, who will consider implementation. However, broader outreach is also done at other venues. In addition, all products are posted on the web or available upon request and shared through various listservs. Tracking the application reviews can be difficult due to this broader outreach. For this assessment, we track the application of Delta ISB products through public comment letters, presentations, or response letters back to the Delta ISB, the knowledge of the council staff, conducting searches on the internet for citation of ISB products, and also getting feedback from surveys and interviews. Next slide. To date, we have over 170 citations on how the ISB's work has been applied or implemented. They typically fall in one of 6 categories. The first category is implementation. There are plans to address a specific recommendation or an actual recommendation has been implemented. Next slide. The second category is implementation support. Their findings from a ISB review is used and cited for a science or adaptive management plan, implementation strategy, or solicitation for research, but it does not address a specific recommendation. Next slide. The third category is process support. ISB review is cited by another entity to acknowledge that their product has undergone independent review by the ISB. Next slide. The fourth category is policy support. ISB reviews are used in public hearings, lawsuits, and public comment letters to support a position on a management decision. Next slide. The fifth category is scientific citation. Findings are used in a peer-reviewed journal article or white paper. Next slide. The last category is informational. Findings and recommendations are summarized in a blog post or news articles to educate or inform readers on various issues. Next slide. We learned that ISB reviews have helped in a variety of ways listed here, including the facilitation of the application of social sciences. In the interest of time, I will just be providing one example on how the ISB has helped advance integrated modeling. Next slide. In 2016, the ISB made a recommendation that the Council, State Board, and DWR co-sponsor a modeling study on the effects of barriers and island flooding on salinity throughout the Delta. It also highlighted the importance of integrated modeling and forecasting to support decision-making. This is an example of a call to action memo. In 2017, the Council funded a 3-year research project as called for in the letter. In addition, the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee was formed to create a collaborative modeling community. Other ISB products like the ISB's Fish and Flows and Water Quality Review both made specific recommendations on modeling, and these two reviews provided high-level direction on the steering committee's efforts. Outside of the Council, both NIMS and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have highlighted how the ISB's work has played a role within their respective organization on modeling. Now I will turn it over to Chelsea.
Great, thank you, Edmund. Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. So today I'm going to talk about perceptions of the ISB among Delta stakeholders and also usage of its products. Before beginning, I'd like to reiterate that analysis is ongoing, so results presented today may differ slightly from results presented in the final report. For this section of the assessment, we used 2 methods of data collection. First, we conducted 12 group interviews with a total of 24 respondents in late 2020. Respondents are individuals from the Delta science and management community, representing a mixture of federal, state, and in-Delta organizations, as well as scientific collaborative groups and public water agencies. They were selected proposively as people who are known to interact with the ISB or to have done so in the past. The objective of the interviews was to gather in-depth information and feedback from those who are well-informed and therefore well-positioned to speak about the ISB and its role in the Delta. Second, in December of 2020, we distributed a survey through a variety of listservs in efforts to reach people representing a greater range of variability in terms of their familiarity with the ISB. We received 174 responses total. In a question asked early in the survey, 19 respondents answered that they were completely unfamiliar with the ISB, at which time they were directed to the end of the survey. The results I present today will not include those 19 respondents. To give you a sense of the sample composition, I'll report some demographic information about organizational affiliation. A majority was affiliated with the state organization, just over 42%, followed by university and federal, both each at about 15%, local around 11%, and under 10% each representing an environmental organization, a private organization, or a water contractor. And that includes either state or federal and the state water contractors. The rest of the respondents either identified as other or they did not respond. Before continuing, I do want to note that this was not a random representative sample. So while the results that I provide are interesting and informative, they can't necessarily be generalized to the larger Delta science and management community. I'm going to start with a preview of some of our major findings. We structured this part of the presentation to give a quick snapshot of some preliminary results that answer a few questions of interest. First, how is the Delta ISB seen by stakeholders? I'll begin with some survey results. In the table, I'm going to show you 4 statements with mean standard deviations and sample sizes. Respondents were asked to rate each statement on a scale where 1 indicates strong disagreement and 4 indicates strong agreement. Please note that these statistics exclude respondents who answered I don't know or who skipped the question, which is why N will differ slightly for each question. A figure on the right will show the percentage of respondents who disagreed or strongly disagreed in blue bars and respondents who agreed or strongly agreed in green striped bars. So here's the first statement. The Delta ISB plays an essential role in the Delta. The average rating on the statement is 3.22, which is a high mean. Remember, our scale is 1 to 4. And as you can see on the right, a pronounced majority agreed with the statement. We saw similar results on this statement. The Delta ISB plays a unique role in the Delta. This statement, the Delta ISB does not promote specific political agendas. And finally, this statement, the Delta ISB provides independent scientific oversight in the Delta. And on the right, you see high percentages of agreement in all cases. From the interviews, we also got a lot of really rich information, which I unfortunately do not have time to discuss in depth today. But a key theme that emerged was the ISB's balance of independence from and its familiarity with the Delta. This balance was central to many stakeholders' understandings of the ISB's mission, credibility, and benefit to the science and management community. There was fairly unilateral agreement that independence is critical to the ISB's role. At the same time, some highlighted the tension independence can create if it prohibits board members from seeking out the in-depth and firsthand understanding of the Delta, which is necessary to conduct informed reviews and formulate relevant recommendations, but also requires close engagement and interaction with stakeholders. There's quite a lot of discussion about whether and how the ISB should or could increase engagement to strengthen its ties to the Delta community. And I'll highlight some of those discussion points when I talk through stakeholder perspectives in a few minutes. The next question I'll briefly address is what impacts or outcomes are associated with the Delta ISB. The short answer is a variety. When asked about the ISB's impacts, stakeholders often talk specifically about implementation of ISB recommendations. That's obviously an important impact, but many other types of impacts and outcomes were also attributed to the ISB or its work, whether explicitly labeled impacts or not. These include things like providing feedback and guidance, increasing overall scientific understanding, providing justification or adding credibility to ongoing activities, catalyzing or informing other community activities, and fostering discussion and reflection. I don't have time to go into these at length, but I do want to point out that while there may be a tendency to think about impacts specifically as recommendations that are implemented, that's a rather narrow interpretation and risks losing sight of these other impacts and outcomes, which may be more generalized or less direct, but are viewed favorably and considered to be beneficial by stakeholders. That said, we know there's a lot of interest in the ISB's recommendations. So one of our main questions is how recommendations have been implemented. In the short time I have here, the most accurate answer I can give is that it's complicated. Several stakeholders discussed how when the ISB makes recommendations for programmatic or on-the-ground change, it's rarely possible to trace a resulting linear or direct causal reaction where that recommendation leads to a decision, which leads to change on the ground. As one interviewee said, I think it's more a process of they put another weight on the scale and that adds to the weights by other agencies and eventually tips, and we do something. In other words, ISB recommendations often lend weight to or provide leverage for ideas or activities that are already in circulation. And at a certain point, there's enough support and enough momentum to make a shift. While stakeholders were generally reluctant to characterize these sorts of reactions as the implementation of an ISB recommendation per se, they also acknowledged that the ISB recommendations are important and influential in driving change forward. I'm going to switch gears and highlight some stakeholder perspectives that are especially relevant to the ISB. I'm going to organize these into 4 major categories: products, ISB recommendations, board orientation, and communication and outreach. These are all areas that were addressed in interviews and revealed a variety of opinions that are of interest to the board. First, products. I'd like to start by saying that overall, stakeholders express high regard for the ISB's products. I'll jump back to some survey results here, and I'm going to report these in the same format as before. And what you're going to see is that respondents express strong positive opinions overall about the ISB's reviews. So in response to this statement, overall Delta ISB reviews provide information that is relevant to the Delta management community. We again had a high mean and a strong majority % agreement. Similar with the statement, the Delta ISB reviews enhance my confidence in science-based decision-making in the Delta, slightly lower percentage of agreement, but still a pronounced majority. Delta ISB reviews are scientifically rigorous. Overall, I trust the scientific findings reported in Delta ISB reviews. And finally, overall, I think ISB reviews provide good recommendations, even if they cannot be implemented. As a complement to these survey results, and especially on this final statement, in several interviews, we also heard from several stakeholders that while recommendations are highly challenging to execute and implementation may be impeded by various constraints, they're generally considered to be good recommendations. As one stakeholder said, when we don't implement recommendations, it's almost never because we disagree. So there was a lot of esteem for ISB reviews overall. We also heard constructive critique and input from stakeholders about various stages of review processes. Before talking about stakeholder perspectives, though, I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to discuss some viewpoints that emerged from interviews with past and ongoing ISB members.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. So we asked the ISB members for their suggestions on doing reviews, since they are the ones who were most familiar with the actual processes that had been used. For all of these stages that I've listed here, most ISB members felt that the processes developed by the ISB over the last 10 years were pretty good and had been improved upon during that time. They did have suggestions for improvement. I don't have time to go through all the input we received, so I'll just highlight one suggestion from each of these stages. So first, choosing what to review. The current processes of seeking input from agencies and stakeholders through personal conversations, surveys, panels, and public comments were considered helpful, but several members suggested seeking more input from higher level decision makers to help determine what might be most helpful to them. Second, methods. Almost uniformly, ISB members thought having a suite of methods to use for reviews was good, including literature reviews, panels, questionnaires, and interviews, and that the specific methods used should be customized for each review. However, several members questioned how much time and effort should be allocated to literature reviews. I'm going to combine 3 and 4, writing the review and ISB endorsement of the review, because they fit together. In writing reviews, the approach developed thus far with lead authors was considered efficient, but that it also means that the rest of the board is then less familiar with the content and rationale behind any recommendations. Some ISB members felt that original recommendations from lead authors were modified to be less bold when vetted by the full board, while others felt it was critical to get to consensus on recommendations. Some members suggested more consideration of the use of minority reports or approaches, as was done with follow-up to the board's rapid change memo to DPIC. And now back to Chelsea.
Thanks, Lauren. Along with that feedback from ISB members, I'll highlight a few other ideas from stakeholders that are also related to the review process. Several stakeholders were unaware of how review topics are selected and expressed a desire for that process to be clearer and more transparent. Some also asked for topic selection to involve more dialogue with relevant stakeholders. In addition, some of the people we interviewed were interested in more transparency around how drafts change through various cycles of writing and revision, even before being released for public comment. We also heard some stakeholders talk about the use of surveys and interviews. A couple interviews surfaced concerns that information gathered through these channels may be somewhat idiosyncratic, representing the views of whomever happens to be interested and available to respond. One group of stakeholders thought the ISB should be more intentional about eliciting organizational rather than individual opinions. Another group of stakeholders pointed out that while it's valuable to survey or interview members of the Delta community, the ISB needs to be very careful about how they report those results, and specifically to separate what emerges as the majority community opinion from their own expert opinion about what constitutes best available science. Next, we'll move on to ISB recommendations. Here, a couple topics discussed by stakeholders was how the ISB engages with relevant stakeholders. This is a topic that is and has been on the ISB's radar as well. Several ISB members mentioned it in their own interviews. My contribution today is to add the perspective of stakeholders we interviewed, many of whom expressed a desire for the ISB to be more proactive about identifying implementers of the recommendations and engaging with those implementers around the recommendations. Stakeholders who we interviewed expressed a variety of opinions about what the nature of this engagement should be. Some wanted more interaction with the ISB just to help them understand what the recommendations are and what they mean after they've been formulated. Some were looking for more explicit guidance about how to implement recommendations. And some wanted to have the opportunity to provide input into the recommendations themselves, working closely with the ISB as recommendations are developed and providing a quote unquote reality check that ensures recommendations are consistent with the practical potentials and constraints. So several points and types of engagement around recommendations were highlighted, but a prevalent theme of many interviews was a desire for the ISB's recommendations to be more practical, actionable, and relevant to organizations in the Delta and the work that's occurring. Also related to heightened engagement with the Delta community, another topic several stakeholders raised is the amount of time spent by board members becoming familiar with the Delta and Delta issues, both at the beginning of board service and in association with any specific review. Stakeholders emphasize the value of a more in-depth orientation, not just to Delta science, but also to management and regulatory context. While the ISB is valued for bringing its outside perspective to the Delta, stakeholders also indicated that the board and its work would be more useful and relevant if better grounded in Delta management realities. This sort of orientation would require a significant time investment, and some noted it may be necessary to reduce expectations for board output overall if they spent more time in orientation. But some stakeholders felt this trade-off should be considered if it has the potential to enhance the quality, utility, and relevance of board reviews. Finally, outreach and communications. Stakeholders identify outreach as a clear area for improvement. On the survey, we asked people to respond to the statement, current outreach effectively promotes awareness of ISB reviews in the Delta management community. And responses here are on the same scale reported before. But as you can see, this mean is much lower. And unlike the other questions, a majority disagreed, almost 62% disagreement. The need to increase and improve outreach was also a point of discussion in interviews with ISB members. And to share some key takeaways, I'll again hand it back to Lauren.
Thanks, Chelsea. We asked ISB members for their thoughts on outreach and communication. They felt it was important to do outreach and that there were many ways that they've been doing it, including presentations to the council and DPIC, web postings and listservs, 2-page briefing sheets, panels at ISB meetings, conference presentations, and scientific publications, but they recognized the need to do more. We received some suggestions from ISB members that included more direct interaction with agency and stakeholder representatives to convey report findings, developing lead author videos, and doing additional outreach to web bloggers and venues such as the Water Education Foundation. Several members wondered what the relative roles of the Independent Science Board, the Delta Stewardship Council, and the Delta Science Program, the staff of those agencies' efforts, what are their roles in terms of outreach and communication? Recognizing that it's critical for the board to have help from the Council and Science Program, and they suggested that discussions with the Council and Science Program staff would be helpful. Now back to Chelsea for input she received from stakeholders.
Thanks, Lauren. Stakeholders did have a lot of feedback on activities they thought might improve ISB outreach and communication. I'm not going to go into that feedback in specific depth today, but a broader theme that emerged in stakeholder interviews was that the ISB has many different audiences, which may most effectively be reached by different avenues. There was a considerable amount of discussion in stakeholder interviews about reaching policymakers and decision makers. Some do feel the ISB is already doing this effectively, but others thought there may be communication gaps and recommended actions like more focused research briefs and or formal cover letters distilling key points and highlighting significance for decision makers. In addition to these sorts of brief written communications, there were suggestions for more regular engagement in appropriate venues to reach decision-making audiences. Greater engagement with DPIC was mentioned frequently, and CAMP and CSAMP for federal audiences in particular. In addition to these high-level decision-making audiences, stakeholders in interviews also highlighted other important audiences who the ISB may not currently be reaching. For example, legislative audiences was one group that came up as currently being generally unaware of the ISB. Delta communities, practitioners, and on-the-ground scientists were also all groups that were mentioned in interviews as potential audiences who could benefit from ISB work, but may not currently be targeted by ISB communication efforts. Overall, given that there are different audiences with different interests, needs, and roles, some stakeholders thought effective outreach may require not only more communication, but also more targeted communication designed to reach specific audiences. One interviewee suggested the board or support staff may want to consider developing a strategic communication plan to direct these efforts. With that, I'll hand it back to Lauren to wrap up the presentation.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. I think we can go to the next slide. So just to wrap up our presentation of initial findings, in general, there are positive attitudes about the Independent Science Board and high regard for its work. ISB efforts and products are being used in many ways. Some recommendations are being or have been implemented, and this is resulting in change. People are also thinking critically and constructively about the Independent Science Board and its role, and there's room for growth and improvement. So the next steps with our project, we need to finish up our analyses and write the report. We're anticipating providing a public draft by the end of June 2021. Next slide. Thank you for your attention to our project and our presentation, and we're open to any questions.
Well, thanks very much, Lauren and Chelsea and Edmund, for this report. We have about 20 minutes for discussion and questions. I'll start by saying my understanding is that when the report is completed in June, it will just be turned over to us, I believe, and there would not be an interim draft report that we would comment on, but it would just sort of come to us to do with as we choose. Is that correct?
Right now we are planning to put out a public draft report, and we're looking into soliciting public comment on that, comment from the board as you choose, and then from the public as well before finalizing that report later. But then, yes, we will be handing it over to you to use for your discussions and deliberation.
So any questions or anything from board members? Joe?
You will have some recommendations, concrete recommendations, how we should go about in mending some of the difficulties we face. Some things were not well received as others.
Yeah, the way we've, through the efforts of doing this project, we actually realized it's probably the best approach is for us to present the findings and highlight what we found, pull it together for your information, but it's probably best, we feel, that the various audiences for this report, including you, the council, public, and stakeholders, then discuss our findings. Certainly you can interact with us and get clarification, but that you yourselves determine how you'd like to use those results and move forward.
Okay, so Tanya first and then Diane.
Thanks. Thanks, Lauren, Chelsea, Edmund. This is really great to see all this work, and it looks like a tremendous amount of work that you've pulled together. So I'm really looking forward to the report. Just a couple small questions. This is for Edmund. On the citations, are you also tracking who is citing the ISB reports or products? That might be something useful to know in addition to kind of how or the topics that are being used or the way it's being used. Is that something we're looking at with these data?
Right now, we haven't analyzed by authors, but the way we're doing our analysis, we have a spreadsheet of who the product belongs to. So that's something that we'll be able to dig up and do some analysis on if you want to report like how many, like where the citations are coming from.
Yeah, it's something I'd be curious about. It could be interesting, and just in terms of who's really accessing the ISB information and kind of which stakeholders are getting access to it in different ways. And then just a quick follow-up or second question, I guess, more for Chelsea. On those survey responses where you see disagreement with some of those questions, are you seeing any patterns there with maybe the types of stakeholders who are disagreeing with that? And that might not be something you've looked into yet, but I'm kind of curious, like, if those are people that really aren't informed about the ISB, if they're not accessing some of the ISB reports, if those are stakeholders that perhaps we need to do more outreach with, or, of course, we're not going to make everybody happy, but just curious about those who are not in agreement.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I have not looked closely at that yet, but I do plan to do so. So that the results of that analysis will probably be in the report.
Thanks.
Okay, Diane.
So this may be a naive question, but from my experience with the USGS and National Research Council committees and at NSF, that press releases were an important part of communicating, so that when a report was finished, or some of our work on acid mine drainage, if there was something that would be public interest, even when I was at the USGS, there was a press release, and then that put some of the onus on people who might be interested to pay attention if there was a press release. So is that something that the Delta ISB has done in the past?
No, we have not.
No, not that I'm aware of. I think one of the things that once we see the full report, I think it would be maybe fruitful to see if there are things where we see that we want to do something and then discuss ways about doing it, and or not. I think that that's certainly, I think, room for discussion on that. I want to just raise a simple question to Edmund. I enjoyed your pie chart of the various categories of usages. If I understand that right, those were numbers, like numbers of times something did that, or number of times they were cited. And is that correct?
That is correct.
So if there was one decision that was made that changed billions of dollars of actions versus a literature citation in a journal, they would be weighted equally?
They'll be weighted equally, but they're in different categories.
Right.
Like something that leads to a decision change will be implementation, and something that's just a citation will be in the citation category.
Right.
So they're obviously not equal weight. Like if you saw that pie chart, obviously implementation is a smaller aspect of it. Obviously, if it leads to bigger changes than just simply citing a reference of the ISB's work and how the findings.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just thank you all very much for this effort and the interviews. I think, Lauren, I'm perfectly happy to see you compile the suggestions that people have come up with for what we should do. We certainly won't be able to do everything, but it will be nice to see the compilation of suggestions.
Yeah, we can do that.
And Jim, and then Lisa, and then Tom.
Yeah, I think this was a terrific idea to do this 10-year retrospective, and it's really valuable for us. And you've clearly done this in a systematic, thoughtful way. So, kudos to you. The one kind of general take-home message I got from your presentations is that, in general, people are satisfied with the products from the ISB. They got scored highly, but less satisfied with engagement and outreach. Is that kind of an accurate big take-home message from what you've learned so far?
Yes, I would say that's generally consistent with what we heard.
Okay, Lisa, Tom, and then Virginia.
Yeah, thank you for this report. It's going to be so useful. I was just a little bit curious about the question of you asked about the ISB is unique. And I think this is one of the things as a newbie, I'm still trying to get my head around. Did you hear anything in the interviews about what the ISB can do that other people can't do? And you don't necessarily have to get into any details now, but it would be great if you could bring that out in the report, because I think understanding our niche and the ecosystem of advisors could be helpful.
Thanks for that question. It's a great one. And it's definitely a point that I'm planning to draw out and develop more at length in the report. But just from kind of the preliminary analysis, we definitely, people pointed to, it was that balance of being an independent body that is legislatively mandated, but also one that is a standing board. And so because of that, longevity has a record of familiarity with the Delta. And that balance was really key to understanding the role that the ISB was able to play. And we had several stakeholders say things like, because of this balance, the ISB speaks with a louder voice, for example, or carries more weight. So, and again, I'm going to be developing more about how stakeholders perceive that weight or that voice to be used. But we heard a lot also as well about just the credibility of the board. Having a standing board adds credibility to Delta science overall. But if you have, for example, some effort that an internal review body within an organization has looked at and given a stamp of approval to, but then you have the Delta ISB come in and also give it stamp of approval, that really adds legitimacy and credibility to that activity.
Okay, Tom.
Are you planning in the report to give us something like a pie chart that shows the background of the people who are responding, so we know how many people are government, how many are private sector, just broad categories?
Yes.
Good.
Definitely.
Okay, Virginia.
Okay, so my comment is more to the board than to the reviewers. This was a really helpful and thorough job that you've done. And the fact that you raised the value of minority reports, I think is really helpful. And I just know I've served on committees where there was a process for minority reports, but it was really buried and wasn't apparent. So I think it's important to have that available, a process for providing minority reports before the need comes up, because sometimes you're in contentious issues, and it just works easier if that process is already there.
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. We do in our guidance for the board, we do have a option for and a process for minority reports for our reviews.
Good.
I just make a comment too, and I think you raised a lot of interesting questions. I could almost go through it bullet by bullet, counterpoints in some interesting cases. But one of the questions that seems to come out of this is the need for the board to do more outreach. And as you pointed out, there is a lot of communication skills, as communication products we've produced, it seems more and more every year. And I'm wondering, is that our role? And is there anyone else who has a role that is to help, I want to say, advertise our results? I'm not asking you to answer the question, but has anybody suggested that it's strictly our responsibility, or that there are others that should be involved? Because you asked the question in your slide, who's responsible?
I can speak.
Go ahead.
I can speak to stakeholder perspectives. We heard, again, a variety of opinions. We did hear some who attributed responsibility to the ISB itself for doing more outreach and communication, more presentations. We did hear several people talk about a greater role for the Delta Science Program and the Delta Stewardship Council as well. And then the third part I would also say is that a lot of stakeholders, not a lot, several stakeholders also attributed responsibility to themselves, noting that there is a lot of activity going on in the Delta and that to some extent the onus is on people who want to follow a certain activity to be attentive and pay attention. So a few different avenues there.
Thanks.
And I would add that likewise, when we interviewed the Independent Science Board members, they mentioned the same thing. They felt felt that they had a role, but there's also a role for science program or council staff to help with that. I think another thing that was interesting to me that came out in the interviews, at least that I don't think about too much, but the stakeholder interviews, is the importance of kind of the other venues that are like word of mouth. Seem to be a venue where certain individuals heard more about the board through word of mouth than perhaps through these other outreach mechanisms.
Yeah, I think for the new board members, once we get back to some sort of resemblance of normal operations, we routinely, and I think even in our guidance, went out as a guidance, went out and did our meetings in the field, so to speak, where we would go to various regions of the Delta. We would have, we would always include a field trip, but we would have the meetings in areas where people in that immediate area could come and visit with us. It was usually a social occasion of some sort as well. So those opportunities once or twice a year were, I think, were extremely valuable to board members to get a sense of what the what the Delta is all about, as well as what the Delta stakeholders are all about, but conversely, to get the stakeholders to have a chance to have some direct contact with us and get to know us better and provide input and discussion. So we will go back to those at some stage. So,
if I may respond to that, Steve, we did hear from several stakeholders that they highly valued those opportunities to have individual interactions. And some people even said that more than reading formal written products, that just the opportunity to have discussion and conversation with the ISB as a board or with individual board members were some of the most valuable and beneficial interactions that they had.
Thanks, Chelsea. I think that might, if you're going to be making a bulletized list of suggestions, it might be useful to also have a bulletized list of things that people found useful, so that we can double down on those as well, such as field trips. That would be very helpful. Any other questions? Jay.
I just wanted to point out that I noticed of the 21 non-panelists attending, 4 of them are former ISB members. So we have a lot of recidivism involved in our group. I also want to second what Steve said about our informal meetings availability with Delta stakeholders and stakeholders in general. We've had a couple of really just wonderful meetings in the Delta where we were up in a hotel that evening, and we just said, well, let's have an evening function where people can just come by and talk to us. And we had a room full of people, and it was just wonderful.
Okay, any other thoughts? Well, again, thank you all for a very informative presentation, and we'll look forward to seeing your report. I think we have, Edmund, is there public comments on this item?
Yes, we have one from Deirdre. So Deirdre, feel free to unmute yourself. And once again, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Deirdre Desjardins, Director of California Water Research. I did want to observe that unlike any other board of the state of California, the Delta Independent Science Board has no staff. Your organization chart shows that you have no executive director, you have no direct reports whatsoever. So I think that some of this assessment should look at that structural issue, because obviously if you're being paid as $100 per diem board members, a structure where you have no staff doesn't work. So I just wanted to provide that observation. The other thing that didn't come out is one of the single most valuable things that the Delta Independent Science Board does is inconvenient truths. And many of the new members may not be aware, but the Delta Tunnel Project is a hard adaptation to climate change. It puts intakes in the North Delta in fixed locations. And the intakes were selected when in 2009 and 2010, when estimates of sea level rise were on the high end up to about 1 meter. And as we all know, estimates have doubled over the last decade, and new high estimates are about 2 meters. And the project is going forward without going back and looking at that. And the Delta Independent Science Board in 2013 was critical at looking at this as an investment. And we recently quoted from this in comments to Metropolitan Water District. It said the potential direct effects of climate change and sea level rise on the effectiveness of actions, including operations involving new water conveyance facilities, are not adequately considered. If the effects of major environmental disruptions, such as climate change, sea level rise, levee breaches, floods, and the like, are not considered, one must not assume that the actions will have the stated outcomes. We believe this is dangerously unrealistic. And the Delta Stewardship Council's draft findings on the project in 2018 found that the California Department of Water Resources failed to use best available science on sea level rise in evaluating the project, and the project was basically remanded. This was one of the most single important impacts of the Delta Independent Science Board. And it was an inconvenient truth that this project, which had so much institutional momentum, but the risks of it were not being communicated to policymakers. And we actually asked that they delay providing investment until the project design had been reevaluated. But this is when this is why we're advocating so strongly for the Delta Independent Science Board, is because with climate change, things are changing so rapidly that investments that might seem like a good idea may not be reevaluated and may need to be reevaluated with respect to the rapid changes that are occurring. So I just wanted to say that that kind of information can be unwelcome to the agency, but it is probably the single most relevant impact you have. And at that time, the Delta Independent Science Board members are really analogous to Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx on the COVID task force in the previous administration. And at that point, you're absolutely irreplaceable and unique. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words, and we really appreciate that kind of support. As I know you know that the review of the EIR EIS for the BDCP was something that was one of the requirements we had under legislation was to do that review. And so we took that very seriously. It took us a tremendous amount of time and effort, but it was we did it extremely carefully. So it was good to appreciate the recognition of that effort. I did want to respond to your first comment about no staff. We do have part-time staff assigned to us, program staff, science program staff. Edmund Yu is primarily with us, and we get a part-time of the Chelsea and part-time of the student fellow. So there are some part-time staff that do work with us. You're correct that no one reports directly to us, but these folks are just absolutely undeniably important, because we could not go on without them, without that kind of support. And as I said earlier, we have requested 2 postdoctoral scholars that will, when appointed, will also provide some more direct support to us. So I think we can move on to the next item. We're within a minute of being on time. This is a short item, 15 minutes, but it talks about future reviews. And I just want to initiate a discussion to talk about sort of brainstorming ideas about future reviews, both the scope and the format, not necessarily in response to the previous presentation, but in general. All the board members now have had some chance to work in depth on some of the ongoing reviews. And I think we want to be in a position by the time we complete these ongoing reviews, which will take most of our time for the next couple of months for sure, but by the July timeframe or so, to really be in a position so we've had a chance to discuss how we might move forward, where we might go, what we might do, not topically at this stage, but in terms of a process, what sort of reviews, and it's a good time to think about those in general. And I plan to have this on the May agenda for a discussion topic, as well as the June agenda for a discussion topic. So this is just to introduce that sort of thinking. And so I don't have anything to throw out there, but just to open the floor and see if people have any sort of things they want to discuss, and how we might frame our discussion over the next 2 meetings, things like that. Jay.
Well, I'm such a professor, I can always be relied upon to speak.
You didn't have your hand up, but I just called on you.
It strikes me that depending upon the outcome of the next few months of legislative activity, we will know quite a bit better about whether we will have sufficient compensation of board members to actually really do in-depth work ourselves. I think if we have more ability to do good work ourselves, even in that circumstance, I think we will probably want to seek a more formal staffing than we have had traditionally, both for the purposes of keeping ourselves organized, helping us out with things to make us operate more efficiently, and for outreach. And I think this staffing we should be looking for should be dedicated to us, not slivers of people. We've had certainly great help from the Stewardship Council staff, but I think we're going to need to have some more dedicated staff to us, whether we get fuller compensation that would allow us to do more work or not. Partly as a matter of economies, but partly I think also to develop a staff that has some ability to do outreach and some sense for how to do outreach, over time.
Lisa.
I think we heard some interesting ideas that folks wanted more input on what we tried to review, or what we chose to review. Again, as a relatively new board member, I would enjoy hearing from a subset of people about issues they think are relevant. I'm not saying we let others decide, but I would like to do more information gathering in some way, and I'm not sure what that process looks like.
Tom, do you have any thoughts?
My mute button. Well, this is one thing that in my time on the board, we've seemed to have struggled quite a bit with identifying reviews. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think we have to develop a process of getting those topics better. Because at least during the time I was on the board, I think the ones that were obvious got done. And as I said, we just sort of struggled with those. So clarifying that process, I think, might be good, how we get to the reviews.
Yeah, I think to show some history on it, that our charge is to do periodic reviews of, oversight of the science, research, monitoring, and assessment programs that support adaptive management through periodic reviews of each of those programs that shall be scheduled, et cetera, to do those every 4 years. The original board members made a decision early on, I believe, that they could not necessarily go and do each individual program every 4 years, that they decided to do these thematic reviews. So that was the board decision, as this is the process that would be most effective. And, and that, just judging by some of the bar charts we saw, it looks like that has been fairly effective. Thematic approach, but that is a decision that was made by the board, and and we can look at that again. We can evaluate. We can decide to change it. I believe it was also decided that they would use the Delta plan as a guidance as to what the reviews might be. And if you look at the Delta plan chapters or sub-chapters, they very much align with some of the original thematic choices, and they still do to some extent. Invasive species as a component of the ecosystem chapter in the Delta plan, and those sorts of things. So that was used as kind of a guidance, and now we're venturing a little bit beyond that with taking leaps forward in terms of rapid response and the kind of things we're talking about. Diane, did I see your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to comment that there is maybe a relationship between the approach in terms of types of reviews and the topics and the time frame. So, for example, some topics may be more suitable for a short review that's done in a year. For example, the HABs problem might be suitable for that, but some other topics may be suitable for a longer term, something that would be more comprehensive. And again, both of these would relate to what's the level of staff support of some kind, because, for example, if we're bringing on postdocs, a report that they can get started on and then it's finished, and then in their postdoctoral experience, that also is a positive outcome, whereas something that's beyond the scope of a time frame of a postdoc who he or she may get a great job offer in their second year and leave. Jay's nodding his head. So you see what I'm saying is time and topic may line up. And that we should think about this as we are moving ahead with recruiting or postdocs for these two positions, which I think are really great to see coming along.
Yeah, very much so. Any other thoughts?
I guess I have one overriding thought that we have a very limited bandwidth, particularly now with the compensation issues. In our current state, if we can get one review done a year, I would, as a long-term average, I would be impressed. But in good times, we were getting maybe 3 or 4 done per year. So we will always have many, many more review topics than we have bandwidth to do. There's some value in us doing, as Diane mentioned, some very brief reviews or even just sort of memo reviews or memo thoughts. We've had some very useful mulings coming out of the board over time on occasion that have been just, short letters.
Steve, I want to return to something you mentioned, that we tend to focus on things that are in the Delta plan, even by chapter, so that I think that tends to limit us a little bit, because the point Deirdre made was really important. We're just one number, sea level rise. It underlies so many of the things we're struggling with in the Delta, and it might be trying to identify a theme like that, even though it's not the expertise of most of us, but really dig into what the real range of numbers is and what the basis for it is, and because it underlines state planning as well as the Delta. It's such an important thing, and it might be something that would be doable for our group.
I think that's a really good example of something we could do that would be fairly short and quick. We might hold a public workshop on it, just as to let other ideas burble out. But probably 2 or 3 or 4 of us could probably put together a technical memo on that as a form of review that would be very readable and useful. And if we had a sort of a public information gathering around it, we could be pretty assured that we would have a pretty broad hearing for it.
So maybe some combination of more focused reviews, and whether they're thematic or down to a memo sort of situation, combined with some of the more traditional reviews, but all in the context of being doable and useful. Yeah. Joe, did I see your hand up? Joe?
No, I was just nodding because it would be a very good idea, given that we have this low bandwidth now, and there are so many interesting topics. So if you take shorter, the kind of more focused topics and have shorter reviews, that might be really helpful. So I was just approving it.
Okay, well, have a think about this topic when you're having an evening nightcap, and send me some ideas if you have, because we'd like to talk about this again starting in May, and how to structure a discussion on this, considering we're going to probably do it in May, and then if we have time again in June, so that we'll be in some place in a July timeframe. And I know this is all, there are codependencies that are beyond our control in terms of time allocation and compensation and the pandemic, which, because everything takes time, and even doing things like the outreach and field trips, and how we might think about moving forward, and how we might structure a discussion around that. So feel free to send me your ideas, send them to Edmund. We're happy to circulate them around and go from there. Any other immediate thoughts before I move on? Okay, Edmund, public comment.
Yes, we have 2 public comments. First, we'll begin with, we still have 2. We'll start off with Bethy Carver-Gibb, and then we'll go over to Deirdre Desjardins again. So Bethy, I'm going to give you permission to talk. So please unmute yourself. And when you unmute yourself, please introduce your name and provide a brief background about yourself.
Thank you, Edmund. I'm Bethy Carver-Gibb. I'm a Delta resident and stakeholder in the Delta, and I did attend early meetings of the Stewardship Council. They had a conference and have been, active in trying to stop the tunnels, but also to get more ideas on, well, what else do we do for water quality? There's got to be alternatives. So I've shared my ideas on that, which is that communities just improve their local water products, and the sewer treatments and how they're using water and reservoirs, and quit putting, the fracking stuff in the aquifers. They empty them, and then instead of putting fresh water, rainwater, then they put the trash. And that's really dumb. So my comment here, the reason I'm here today is because I've had a project going since 2015 and before with the glyphosate, which is a probable carcinogen. And I sent this information to the California EPA in 2015, asked them, can we ban this? What can we do? And they said, well, they could list it as a probable carcinogen. That's it. So the state invasive species program sprays glyphosate in whatever form on the water hyacinth and other plants. And this will go on because it's ordered by the federal government. So that whole effort to stop the state from doing this has stopped because there's, ordered by the federal government, there it is. We have animals dying, people are dying. This is a very big issue, and it's very long-term dangerous for the public and for everything living. So my question would be is, can the council look into a way of looking at this problem and giving the federal government some kind of a study or a recommendation of something that would be non-toxic to, mammals. And I do understand water hyacinth is nasty and some of these other things are difficult for the boating and other communities, but there are alternatives. And I think that we really must look at those. We really must change and stop using glyphosate here. It's just a very, very destructive activity. And people are more aware of these things with the social media. So social media is where you aren't there. And so that's where your marketing product, your outreach to stakeholders is missing. So there could be something you could do as a more interactive website, or I don't know, if you want to do Facebook or something that can get out of hand. You have to really be, I don't know. I like it and then I don't like it. But there could be a way of getting more information from your stakeholders, doing surveys there where the boaters are, where your sport fishing and residents, farmers, they're on Facebook. And so that's a suggestion, But so anyway, this is my thing. And then with the tunnels, Deirdre was talking about the tunnels, and they're going to destroy every aquifer for 35 miles in very rich farmland and steal the water, sell it back to them. They did this in the 1950s. And I'm in an extended family of farmers in Moreno Valley, who this specifically happened to, put them out of business. So, and we did share this with Barbara at Restore the Delta, and in the nick of time. So I hope I'm not too late on anything, you know. I don't want to be in the nick of time, but at least that for something that I may be able to help with our environment here and our people, and to keep some kind of tragedy from happening. I live across the street from Delta Cove, so if that says enough. You have no idea the destruction that continues because of that project. They did underestimate a number of things. So the science in the Delta is pretty tough. And anticipating damage is very difficult. So the less big activities that we do, the better, because we do not have enough knowledge of the earth itself to either know what we're doing or what will happen from that later, especially in the Delta, because this is a peat bog with aquifers. So, you know, I mean, you just can't anticipate what's going to happen. So, and it's a very rich area. It's well loved, and, you know, by everybody, you know, the Pacific Flyway, this is the stopping place. So, you know, maybe bird watchers could help you with ideas, you know, and their observations. And they work with the farmers generally. And a lot of farmers are bird watchers. So that community might help with your information. So I guess I better, my time is probably up, but thank you for listening. And I'll be sending my comments to Edmund Yu. And so with the Delta tunnels, we do need to look at the fact that we really don't know. The engineers don't know what they're saying when they say they're going to do this and that's what's going to happen. Really, no. There's going to be all these other things that will happen. And they don't want to say it. So, but it will happen. You can.
Okay,
you know,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. Very informative. And I think the whole social media mechanism is certainly something we need to explore. Deidre, I think, are you next?
Yes, I just wanted to observe, so as far as sea level rise, there's a number of scientists who have participated in California's 4th climate assessment, and I particularly thought of Daniel Kyan at the team at Scripps University. And there used to be a whole California climate action team, but I think the Delta Stewardship Council might seek more of a relationship with the scientists who work on the climate assessment and do those studies. And also, for example, USGS is working on sea level rise. They did some excellent work, and NOAA. And perhaps because of the limited resources of the DISB, you know, working with some of the federal agencies and some of the academic researchers that are on the climate assessment might be a good option.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, when we've done surveys in the past, we have routinely had a lot of comments on dealing with climate and including it in our reviews, if not doing it as a part of a separate review. So it's clearly a topic we have to continually pay close attention to and think about in terms of future reviews. Any other public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
Okay, we'll move on to item number
just a time check. Just a time check, Steve. We only have about 6 minutes left for this meeting.
Yeah. Is it okay if we go over? Let me ask the board members first. If we take about 10 extra minutes, is there anybody who has to leave?
My class starts in 6 minutes, so but please forge ahead.
Okay, we'll assign everything we have to do to you then. All right, we will try to move forward. So our next item is a Delta Lead Scientist report. And Laurel, if I know you have some articles of interest you want to share as part of your report, if you could just send those to us, that might save a little time.
Sure, I could do that. And looks like Edmund's pulling up the slides. Okay, great. I think I'm going to try to be brief on some of these things. Next slide, please, Edmund. My plan today is to give brief meeting reports on 2 of the meetings that have taken place since my last lead scientist report. I do want to say a little bit more about the Social Science Community of Practice launch that took place at the Bay Delta Science Conference and some other ongoing activities. Diane, before you have to go, I want to make sure you have the Science Actions Workshop on your radar. Save the date for July 13th through 14th, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that when I get to that part of the report. But this is a key date for the Independent Science Board to really weigh in on the process of developing the Science Action Agenda. Next slide. So just briefly, can we get the next slide? Is it working? Briefly, I wanted to report on the monitoring steelhead populations in the San Joaquin Basin workshop. Oh, yeah, I guess I didn't have a separate slide for that, but that took place on February 17th through 19th. And this workshop was convened in support of the biological opinion on long-term operation of the Central Valley Project and State Water Project, which calls for developing a plan to monitor steelhead populations within the San Joaquin Basin and or San Joaquin River downstream of its confluence with the Stanislaus River. And so the workshop, the participants reviewed the management challenges and existing monitoring framework for San Joaquin Basin steelhead. And they ended up concluding that this is a complicated management and resource challenge with broad stakeholder interests. And although the current monitoring framework is sophisticated, there are still many better opportunities to align, coordinate, and create consistency. And so next steps to be aware of associated with that workshop, which I think some of you at least tuned into, involve scoping a potential manuscript and also reconvening agency members that assisted with the long-term operations non-flow action steelhead charter, and then forging ahead and drafting a San Joaquin Basin monitoring plan. So some really important outcomes associated with that workshop. I did see many of you at the Bay Delta Science Conference last week, and Steve, it was great to see your talk on invasive species. I just wanted to briefly report that although this was a fully virtual format, attendance set records. We had nearly 1,700 participants at this conference, and the previous record was about 1,300 participants in 2014. So we do think that the virtual format enabled us to broaden participation in the meeting, and we do hope to continue offering at least a hybrid virtual format to continue encouraging this widespread participation among people interested in the Delta science community. So hopefully at the next meeting, there will be a little more time to give a more detailed report of that conference. But one really important outcome to keep on your radar from that conference was, now we'll go to the next slide, was that Jessica Rudnick, our Sea Grant Extension Specialist housed within the council, launched a social science community of practice. And this was on April 7th in the afternoon of the workshop. You could see a screenshot of some of the participants, and you see some familiar faces there. but the workshop involved, or the launch event involved using Menti, which is online, which is an online polling system, in order to feel out what type of activities this community would like to be involved in. And so some of the potential outputs from this community might be coordination on future proposals, convening a steering committee, putting together collaborative syntheses and review papers, and also putting together a brown bag seminar series. And this is something that we hope we could coordinate to some extent with the Independent Science Board. And so there will be regular activities associated with the social science community of practice. And if you are interested in staying abreast of this, but for some reason weren't able to attend this launch event at the Bay Delta Science Conference, please feel free to reach out to me and or Dr. Jessica Rudnick, who will keep you in the email loop about current activities. So next slide, please. I also had the opportunity, and I don't have a slide for this, I also had the opportunity to launch an Ask Me Anything office hours series yesterday, which I anticipate will be a monthly event. This is a way to better reach out to the greater Delta science community. But these office hours are taking the form of a format. They're actually conducted on social media. There was that earlier mention of the need to do outreach through social media. These are being conducted through Instagram Live. And there will be certain themes associated with the office hours each month. This theme was building on the Bay Delta Science Conference, building resilience through diversity in science. And there was active participation yesterday. We had over 25 participants who asked really great questions about how to really break into the Delta science community, as well as how we deal with broad questions of diversity, not just demographic diversity, but questions about how we manage for biodiversity, given the constraints that we have dealing with regulation of individual listed species. So it was a really interesting opportunity to engage more broadly. I would like you to all save the date, as I said before, for July 13th through 14th, which is the date that the Science Actions Workshop will be held. This is an important milestone in putting together the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda. And so just to back up a little bit and tell you a little bit more about the process, one of the important activities that's ongoing right now associated with the Science Action Agenda is a science assessment. This is essentially an assessment of progress that has been made on the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda. The team within the Delta Science Program has reached out to fellow funding agencies, fellow science agencies, and academics in order to ensure that actions that have been taken in response to the last Science Action Agenda are listed and curated within this spreadsheet. This will help us really identify existing gaps with respect to the last set of science actions highlighted in the Science Action Agenda, things that we should carry forward into the next Science Action Agenda. And that, together with the top 65 management questions that you all have had a chance to see now, will form the basis, or form the informational basis needed to craft a concrete set of science actions for the next Science Action Agenda. And this will be done in a collaborative format through this Science Actions Workshop. Following the Science Actions Workshop, a draft Science Action Agenda will be released in late summer to early fall. And this is the draft that the ISB specifically will be asked to comment on. So we don't have a concrete date for you yet, but we're aiming for that late summer to early fall timeframe. Steve, how much time do I have? I just want to get a sense for whether I should cover these article spotlights or basically just send you the written materials.
Send us the written materials.
Okay. I will do that. Maybe I could just say a 1-minute summary so that you know what to look for. The Lukovic et al. Paper looks at climate trends observed since the 1960s and basically finds that the rainy season has a later onset by 27 days since the 1960s. And then the second paper was lead authored by Annika Keeley, who is staff within the Delta Science program, and she was reviewing a suite of connectivity metrics and developed a decision tree that would help managers identify which connectivity metrics they should be using in assessing large-scale landscape features for planning, conservation, and adaptation under future climate change. So this is really interesting, and I think it has a lot of relevance to large-scale conservation planning within the Delta, and also to the Delta Landscape Scenario Planning tool, which is one of the tools that was presented to DPIC. So if that piques your interest, be sure to check out the written materials and the articles themselves.
Okay, thanks, Laurel. Any comments or questions from board members? Okay, Edmund, is there any public comments?
There are none.
Okay, let's move on to item 7, which is the preparation for upcoming meetings. One of the things we want to do is to have in our May meeting is to have a presentation on ecological forecasting. And I don't know if we can say who we're thinking of inviting, but can we, Edmund?
We can, because he's expressed interest.
Go ahead.
Michael Dietz from Boston University.
Yes, this was recommended by Laurel, and it'll be a general discussion on ecosystem forecasting and prediction and what it's all about and so forth. In May, you've seen that our meeting has been moved because the council had a change of date in its meeting, and which they had to reschedule during our meeting. So you've been sent a couple of doodle polls. One thought I had was to have, if we can't fix in on a date, was to possibly think about 2 dates. One meeting for an hour to discuss future Delta plans, and maybe have our things like reports, and then a second meeting, which would just be talking about ecosystem forecasting and our guest lecture. So please fill out that early May time schedule. And that's sort of what I'm thinking of doing at the present time, but we really don't know enough details yet to lock in a date for May. And then June, we'll just carry on ideas for June meetings. We'll include talking about future reviews, but any other thoughts, just send them to us for June agenda items. That's all I have on that. Any public comments on that?
We have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Please unmute yourself to provide your public comment.
Thank you. Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. I just wanted to put a request of the Delta Independent Science Board. We are looking into budgetary issues because it's severely affecting the ability of the ISB to do its carry out its statutory mandate. And we're hampered that the Delta Stewardship Council stopped doing detailed budget reports after 2015. And they used to do some more general quarterly budget updates, but they stopped doing those in this fiscal year. So we're going to be doing Public Records Act requests, but those do take a while to be responded to. And it would be helpful if the board itself would request an update for past, current, and the upcoming year for what the budget is for the board. and the science program. It's really not clear, but it does seem that if your compensation was going to be changed for this fiscal year, that it would have helped greatly to have some dedicated staff brought on board that reported directly to you to help you carry out your mission. And there's no reason that couldn't have happened. So these are one of the things that we're looking into. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess, Edmund, we can move on to the next item on review of items for follow-up. Oh, wait, I got Jim.
Could I just say something about this theme of ecological forecasting? I heard a terrific talk at the Bay Delta Science Conference, and this is going to sound like a plug for another USGS scientist. Her name is Tamara Wilson, and it was just a great talk doing projections through the end of the century about the combined effects of land use change in the Central Valley and climate change on migratory birds and their habitat. So we're doing some really neat stuff on ecological forecasting locally. And at some point, I think we need to invite some of those people to talk as well.
Yeah, I would think so, given the interest in the science needs assessment recommendations that we have there and the general interest in the board as well. This initial talk is to provide sort of a broad overview of things that'll get us all sort of on the same page. I too heard some interesting forecasting type presentations at Bay Delta. So we might think down the road of having maybe a panel, bring it back down to the Delta as per se about what's being done. And some of that will come up, I'm sure, in the Delta Science Needs Assessment group, because we will be talking to agency folks about what they're doing in that particular field. Okay, Edmund.
Yep, so once again, sorry for running overtime, but I'll just be very quick. So if you have any ideas on future reviews or how to format the next few meetings to discuss future reviews, please send them over to me and I'll discuss them with our chair in future planning. In addition, I'll be sending out a staff report for the ISB that covers the articles that Laurel could not get to today, and also sharing some more details of all the stuff we covered for today's meeting. And I'll be sure to give Jim a copy of a report on water supply reliability that we discussed earlier. Anything else that you would like me to capture, Steve?
Can't think of anything offhand. Board members who haven't responded to the May doodle poll should do so. Any public comments for items not on the agenda?
There are none.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Sorry we ran over this time. I thought it was a very full agenda. So have a nice weekend, and we'll see you sometime in May.
Thank you.